Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on one who wants to borrow." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In today's Gospel, we hear this very interesting line, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. Does anybody know where an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth comes from? What was Jesus quoting? He was quoting from the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which is probably surprising and shocking for many of us when we hear that. It seems awfully violent. The reason why it is stated like that in the Old Testament is because in the days of Moses, if somebody was damaged by another person or harmed by another person, they would likely take revenge. And often that revenge would be disproportionate to the crime. As we saw in today's first reading, Naboth was accused of blasphemy and other crimes, and for that he was stoned to death. Disproportionate to the crime. And so that was a common occurrence in the ancient world. If you didn't, this was before the days of, police and courts, right, and laws. And so if somebody was harmed, they would just take full-out revenge. And so Moses tempered that revenge by putting it in the law, that if somebody plucks out your eye, all you can do is take out their eye, and nothing more. If somebody takes out your tooth, you can do nothing more than take out their tooth, right? And so on and so forth, the different crimes that would have been committed. He was actually, even though it sounds violent and harsh to us, it was actually more just than in those days. This is not the only time that Moses did this in the Old Testament. He also did it with the law of divorce. Jesus elsewhere in the Gospels, he said that you have heard that it is said that you can divorce. But I say to you, from the beginning it was not so. Moses allowed divorce because of the hardness of your heart. Why did Moses allow divorce? He allowed divorce because in the ancient world, again, if you didn't like your spouse, you would just get rid of your spouse. Unless divorce was permitted. So Moses permitted divorce among the ancient Israelites and the hardness of their heart. So sometimes in the Old Testament, Moses gave laws, right, that basically seemed like compromises or that seemed harsh to us, but they were actually more just than the current circumstance. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, which we have been reading from, he is calling his hearers to something higher than just the bare minimum morality. And this is what Jesus does all throughout salvation history. God is always calling people to something higher. And sometimes it takes time for that to develop. It was only in the fullness of time that Jesus was able to come and reveal these laws. That no longer should you take out somebody's eye or take out somebody's tooth. You should offer no resistance, as in not seeking out revenge for those who wish you evil. This was also a common question that the early Christians got in the early centuries. Right? People noticed that in different times in the Bible, God seemed to permit certain things that were condemned in the New Testament. So, of course, things like divorce, or things like the violent warfare that you saw during the days of Joshua and Judges, or the fact that many of the patriarchs, they had multiple wives. St. Irenaeus and the other early church fathers, they made an analogy with this. And they said that God's people was like a child in the days of the Old Testament. And gradually that child grew, and so gradually God could reveal his teachings more to them. It's called progressive revelation. So what Jesus is doing here in the Sermon on the Mount is he's doing what God always does. He's calling us to something higher, but he's also recognizing what we are capable of. And he's communicating it to us at our level.